Donald Trump's trade war is in full motion once again. The U.S. president is now threatening a 50% tariff on all European Union imports starting June 1st. Meanwhile, he also wants to impose a 25% tariff on Apple unless iPhones start being made in the United States.
Let's get back to our top story. President Trump threatening 50% tariffs on the EU starting June 1st. Joining us now from Europe.
Once again, U.S. President Donald Trump has ignited a trade conflict with the European Union. On Friday, President Trump announced, through social media and an executive order signed in the Oval Office, that a sweeping 50% tariff will be imposed on goods imported from the European Union. This rate is more than double the previously threatened 20%, signaling a stark escalation. In a statement, Trump declared unequivocally, "We are not looking for a deal." Writing on Truth Social, he accused the EU of imposing high trade barriers, VAT charges, digital services taxes, unfair legal actions against American companies, and currency manipulation, all contributing, according to him, to a $250 billion annual trade deficit. However, data from the U.S. Department of Commerce reveals that the actual trade deficit stood at $236 billion in 2023. Critics were quick to note this apparent manipulation of numbers as an attempt to sway public opinion. In swift response, the European Commission began preparing a robust countermeasure, a retaliation package worth 100 billion euros. EU Trade Commissioner Maros Sefcovic confirmed he had met with U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer and Trade Secretary Howard Lutnick. The European Union's detailed 200-page retaliation plan targets over 4,800 American products, whose total import value exceeded 109 billion euros in 2024. Leading the list are American aircraft, 13 billion euros, and automobiles, 7 billion euros. Also included are symbolic and sensitive items, such as roller coaster parts, agricultural goods, chemicals, and scrap metals. But Brussels' response won't be limited to tariffs alone. The European Union is preparing to challenge Trump's measures at the World Trade Organization, WTO, citing their retaliatory nature. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen emphasized the EU's resolve. "Our aim is a fair and negotiated solution with the United States, but we are ready for all outcomes." In particular, Trump has criticized the EU's heavy-handed regulations and fines on U.S. tech giants. Yet, Brussels appears determined to push further in this area, identifying digital services as a vulnerable point for the U.S. With the WTO's moratorium on electronic transmission tariffs in place, Europe still possesses three potent tools: technical restrictions, new taxation, and legal tightening. On the technical front, EU Internal Market Commissioner Stefan Sejourn is working to ensure stricter compliance with European standards in sensitive sectors. New rules are being crafted to reduce reliance on American service providers, especially in cloud computing. Though Microsoft has responded with 5 digital commitments to ease European concerns, looming changes in U.S. privacy and data policies, driven by Trump-appointed officials, could jeopardize the existing USU data transfer agreement. Privacy advocate Max Schrems warns that such changes may force the EU to suspend the agreement, threatening billions of euros in data flows and related services. Secondly, the EU is revisiting digital services taxes aimed at major U.S. firms like Amazon. These taxes seek to address profit shifting to low-tax jurisdictions. However, studies show that these costs are largely passed on to consumers through higher seller fees. The third, and perhaps most impactful measure, is legal action. On April 23rd, the European Commission fined Meta 200 million euros and Apple 500 million euros. A ruling against Alphabet is expected shortly. These fines are being levied under the EU's new Digital Markets Act, DMA, alongside the Digital Services Act, DSA, which now applies to Elon Musk's Platform X, formerly Twitter. These twin laws enhance regulatory oversight and reinforce digital sovereignty, significantly curtailing the operating freedom of U.S. tech firms in Europe. Yet, analysts caution that the standoff is unlikely to be easily resolved. Agata Dar, senior policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations, remarked, "No one saw this coming." She criticized Washington's aggressive tone as lacking coherence or strategic clarity, cautioning further, ING Bank's chief Eurozone economist Carsten Brzezinski warned that such sweeping tariffs could spark a scenario of elevated inflation and slower economic growth in the U.S., while dragging Europe toward stagnation and threatening global economic stability. A model by Julian Hinds of the Kiel Institute for the World Economy predicts that these policies could reduce U.S. economic growth by 1.5%. Neil Shearing, chief economist at Capital Economics, noted that the unpredictable use of tariffs and growing fiscal deficits are alarming financial markets. He cited Moody's recent downgrade of the U.S. credit rating, which reflects doubts about Washington's ability to rein in mounting debt. Shearing added that such erratic policies erode confidence in America's economic direction. Professor Mary E. Lovely of Syracuse University highlighted a deeper concern: the increasing perception of risk among companies looking to invest in the U.S. She noted, "The president wants to boost domestic investment, but how can companies plan manufacture in a country where the leader might suddenly impose high tariffs on essential imports and provoke retaliation from export markets?" This pattern of volatile rhetoric, followed by retreat, is familiar. Trump had once threatened China with tariffs as high as 145%, prompting China's 125% response, after which negotiations resumed. Just 2 weeks ago, Washington and Beijing agreed to a 90-day suspension of top-tier tariffs. A similar cycle now seems to be unfolding with the EU. Accordingly, Trump's hardline stance may end up strengthening European resolve. Respond firmly, and the markets will panic, forcing the president to retreat. That is the approach Brussels seems to be embracing. In summary, what began as a calm week has ended in disruption, reminding global markets that we are far from a stable or amicable trade environment. If enforced, the 50% tariff could reduce Eurozone GDP growth by 0.6 percentage points and edge the region toward recession. At the same time, it would rekindle inflationary pressures in the U.S. Though there remains a chance for negotiations, the situation is highly volatile. The European Commission's firm warning to trigger a €100 billion retaliation the very next day may be the only thing capable of forcing Washington to reconsider. If both sides proceed to extremes, a dramatic rupture in transatlantic trade and chaos in global markets may be unavoidable. While the broader economic and political fallout remains to be seen, the world now watches closely, awaiting the next moves from Washington and Brussels.